Welcome to the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube. This is our Awakening Together weekly gathering. Each and every week we have a different minister who speaks. If you'd like to attend our services live, please visit our website awakening-together.org. Click on Online Sanctuary on the main menu. Then, How to Enter the Sanctuary. Our services are held Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary.
Thank you, Shauna. Just glad to be with you all this morning on this holiday weekend. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm not sure if anybody was affected by the storm. It's kind of strange on the East Coast because we're so used to not being affected by a lot of this stuff. You know, we're usually watching it on the news somewhere else. And we're in a bit of denial when we get the warning on the phone that's like, you know, flood alert or tornado. We're like, yeah, tornado, schmado, you know, whatever. Me and my husband were like, should we go in the basement? Nah. And then we were really surprised the next morning to see that the tornado was a little more than a mile from our house. So there were like 5 tornadoes in this region, and we were like, ooh, you know, maybe we should take this seriously. So hopefully everybody did well. We were just, you know, praying for everyone. Some people had, you know, a little bit of devastation in this area, and hopefully you all did well. But again, just glad to be with you all this morning. And we'll just begin to greet each other in the room. Okay. Now we'll have our statement of purpose. The statement of purpose is core value 3. We accept one true self, which is one presence or being, non-dual, without beginning or end, and absolutely changeless. We live this value by practicing letting go of the belief in the individual self as who we are. I think I must have used this core value for my last 10 talks. No, I feel like this. I feel like I keep choosing the same core value. The song that I'm using, it just was very interesting. Just how I arrived at this is that the title of my homily is Leaving Me Alone. And I was looking for a song that had Leave Me Alone in it, in the lyric. And so the first thing that came up, you know, was this rap video, and I was like, nah. And then at first I immediately just shut it down. And then I read the lyrics and I'm like, oh my God, this is my talk. And I said, now I have to watch the video. And the imagery was just so powerful. He is literally talking about letting go of mind, letting go of thoughts, letting go of ego, and what it looks like when you fight it, and when it looks like when you surrender. So I thought that was just very interesting. It was like it dropped in my lap. I've never heard of this artist or the song, but it's pretty interesting. The lines that you can make out are really the only ones that matter. You know how rap songs are sometimes. They speed up the lyric really fast and you're like, what? So the parts of the the lyric that speed up really almost embody the chaos of how the mind works and how it could just rapid fire, you know, overwhelm you, you know. So it's very appropriate. And so I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, here you go. Let me see here. All right, so just moving into the prayer for today. And again, just breathing in this beautiful sacred space, knowing that there is no part of who we are that is not sacred and that is not without purpose. And that is not without perfection. Knowing that there's no part of us that we need to push away or run from. And that embracing it all allows us to express it all, allows us to experience it all, allows us to be it all. Knowing that it is all one, and so it is. So now we will have Reading by, I remember, Andy Walker, a book called Who Cares? It's the unique teaching of Ramesh S. Balsekar. Chapter is chapter 4, called Ego. The section he'll be reading from is Sense of Freedom, pages 51 to 53, and Free Will, pages 53 to 60. And as he's reading, it's kind of like Nisargadatta goes back and forth with a student. He goes back and forth with several students. So if you hear him mentioning a different name, you'll know that's what's happening. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Beverly. And I loved your music selection. That was fantastic. Leave Me Alone. That was very good. As Beverly said, I'm going to read from Who Cares by Ramesh S. Balsekar. So I think it might make it easier. I'm just going to share my screen as I read. You can read along with me if you want. Okay, this is a Sense of Freedom. Ashika, when you speak about how our lives are determined using the concepts of the robot or the computer, it sounds like it's very limiting. There's no choice, no freedom. But my experience is that I feel filled up with a sense of freedom. Ramesh, sure, that's the whole point. So what is that sense of freedom which arises? What kind of freedom is it? Ashika, I am not that computer or the robot. Ramesh, exactly. That's the whole point. So freedom from what? Freedom from that which earlier identified itself with the computer. It means freedom from the computer itself, freedom from the identification with the computer. The feeling, Ashika, is that earlier you thought you were the computer, and now you know that you are not the computer. That computer is being used by the source or God to bring about such actions as are supposed to happen through the body-mind organism. Isn't that right? Ashika, I used to think that freedom was freedom of choice to do what I want. Ramesh, free will. Ashika, yes, that all seems to die. Ramesh, so there is no free will. It does not bring a sense of constriction or freedom. Ashika, there is a totally different freedom of not being involved at all. Ramesh, yes, freedom from involvement. Your experience has been that involvement is what causes unhappiness. If there is no involvement, there is no unhappiness. So really what you're saying is that freedom is from unhappiness because the freedom is from involvement. And who gets involved? The ego gets involved. The freedom is the freedom from the ego. And the ego is the sense of personal doership. So the freedom is ultimately the freedom from the sense of personal doership, both for this body-mind organism and other body-mind organisms. This is remarkable as far as you are concerned. Others may not accept this. But as far as you're concerned, the freedom extends to everybody. No one has free will. All that happens is that actions happen through the billions of body-mind computers. So there is no need for Ashika to feel guilty or proud or hate anybody. Is that acceptable? Ashika, yes. Ramesh, this is the freedom that is reflected in your understanding, freedom from guilt, freedom from pride, freedom from hate and envy, which means what? Freedom from involvement. It is the involvement which causes unhappiness. A little bit of happiness, a lot of unhappiness. So accepting what happens as something with which Ashika cannot be involved and over which Ashika has no control at all, this is the freedom that whatever is happening is beyond the control of anyone. Therefore, whatever is happening is just accepted as something which is supposed to happen and not by the will of any individual. Ashika, I was feeling confused because there was this tremendous sense of freedom, but it wasn't a sense of freedom from or a freedom to do. It was just this freedom to be. Ramesh, you see, the freedom from involvement is freedom from the bondage of the ego. The ego is restricted. So the ego, who thought earlier that he was free to do whatever he liked, now finds there is no ashika to do whatever anybody wants. This is the freedom from responsibility, freedom from the sense of personal doership, and freedom from guilt or pride. This same freedom is translated by the ego as the loss of its own personal free will. You see? So really, this freedom is itself freedom from the ego. But the ego can't feel this freedom. Ego feels it has lost the free will to do whatever it wants to do, which it thought it had. This was the confusion you felt. The freedom which arose from the loss of the sense of personal doership meant the loss of freedom for the ego. Does that make sense? Yes. Ramesh, I repeat, freedom from the sense of personal doership means loss of freedom for the ego. And that is the confusion, because there is still this identification of the ego with this body-mind organism called ashika. The ego still remains and feels terribly restricted. Okay, the next section is called free will. Ramesh, first you tell me what you mean by free will. Ron, the notion that I can choose between one thing and another. Ramesh, yes, but does that include the consequences of what you choose? Your free will is to choose one thing or the other. Does your free will include the actual happening of what you choose? Mark, no. Ramesh, what use is your apparent free will, Mark? So that free will, which is of no use, you have. So what is the free will? To choose? To choose. Certainly, you can choose. But whether what you choose happens or not is not in your control. That's why when people use these words, I usually stop them and have them tell me what they mean by free will. Mark, the logic that you've laid out, which makes sense to me, is that there is a natural unfolding of creation, that once it's set in motion, it unfolds in a very complex and determined pattern, And then there's this ego which thinks it can choose one way or the other. Ramesh, you see, what do you make your choice on? How do you make your choice? Mark, that would be my question, because I would ask the question, who chooses? Ramesh, who chooses? The ego chooses. But the ego chooses on what basis? My point is that the ego makes its choice on the programming it has received. Mark, and has no control over. Ramesh, the environmental conditioning over which the ego has no choice. Mark, or DNA or whatever. Ramesh, that's right. So there is DNA or the genes over which you had no choice, plus the environmental conditioning over which you have had no choice. It is these two things that I call the programming with which you will make your choice. You'll make your choice on what you have been conditioned to think is right or wrong. So if your free will is based on the programming over which you have had no control, then whose free will are we talking about? Mark, so even the free will is a function of the absolute subject or the source. Ramesh, that's right. Or rather, the free will that you have so much is based on something over which you have no control. Mark, that's good. That's really good. Ramesh, I come back again to the valid question of the ego. The ego has a valid question. In living in society, I'm expected to make a choice. Do I not make a choice? I say, of course you do. But all I'm saying is that the choice you make, consider whether it is really your choice or does the choice happen? Ramesh, I say, thy will be done, which means the human being has no free will. And yet I tell you, do whatever you like. What more freedom do you want? Do you have a problem with these apparently contradictory statements? Can you explain why there is no problem for you, Nazneen? If there is no problem, it means they are not truly contradictory statements. Can you explain this? Some people may say they are obviously contradictory. Nazneen, for me, it doesn't present a contradiction because whatever has been happening anyway. I haven't been doing anything. So there really is no individual doer, and there never has been an individual doer. So when you say, do whatever you like, it means that whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Ramesh, wait a minute. To whom do I tell, do whatever you like? Nazneen, you're telling the ego. Ramesh, I'm still telling the ego which exists. What you just said was that if there is an understanding that there is truly no ego, then there is no problem. That's correct. But that is not my point. My question is, does the ego have a problem when I say, do whatever you like? What more freedom do you want? And yet, to the same ego, I'm saying, thy will be done, meaning you have no free will. Meaning you have no free will? Is there a contradiction? The ego asks the question, How do I live in society if I have no control over my actions? And my answer to the ego is, do whatever you like. What more freedom can you want? Nazneen, yes, but your answer is that whatever you want and whatever you like is what God wants and God likes. Ramesh, that's the point. But why is it not a problem? That is the issue. And the problem is always, always for the intellect. Any problem is always for the intellect. The intellect says, you tell me that nothing happens unless it is the will of God. Therefore, I have no free will. And yet you tell me to do what I like. What more freedom do I want? So the intellect says that these two concepts are contradictory. How do you explain to the intellect, which is the ego, the thinking mind, that these are not contradictory? The answer is, you may do what you like, but what you like to do is exactly what God wants you to like to do at that moment in the given circumstance. Therefore, there is no contradiction. Do whatever you think you like. And how does God manage that? Through the programming. What you think you like is based on the programming. Genes plus conditioning. God acts through the programming. What use is that total freedom to do what you like to do if what happens is not in your control? To that extent, you have no free will. James, and therefore, the freedom is useless. Ramesh, that is the point. That is the conclusion the ego has come to. The impression of freedom, which it has been under for so many years, is useless. Reina. But then nothing really matters. Ramesh. That is the final conclusion you come to. Nothing really matters. What is the final effect of self-realization, of enlightenment? Whatever happens, what does it matter? The intellect will say, how can you tell me nothing matters? Of course it matters. To the intellect, everything matters. So nothing matters is the conclusion, the answer, the feeling that comes from the heart. What the sage feels every moment is whatever is happening. What does it matter? But the ego says, of course it matters. When the answer finally comes from the heart, nothing that happens really matters. What is the meaning of this? What is the significance of the heart coming to this conclusion? The significance is that whatever the ego perceives as happening and that it matters is really an illusion. So only after the total final understanding is it that nothing happens. And if nothing happens, what can matter? To whom? So you go back to the first line of the saying by Ramana Maharshi as the final truth. There is no creation, there is no dissolution. If there is no creation, to whom can anything matter? You see, so it is not the ego which says, what does it matter? Of course it matters to the ego. But when the ego is demolished and the total final understanding happens, then the real feeling comes up. What does anything that appears matter? Because whatever appears is just that, only an appearance. What does an appearance matter? What does it matter? What is it? The it is an appearance. Nothing really happens. Nothing is created. The ultimate understanding is that it really doesn't matter. Mirabai, more and more, my experience is that it's not me making any decision anyway. Increasingly, I have these flashes of the experience that it really is just consciousness happening. When I say something, I do something, I make a decision, it feels more and more as if decisions are being made. Moving my arm, it's predestined. Frequently, it feels like that. And this is beginning to give me a sense of that freedom. Ramesh, can you explain that a little bit, Mirabai, as you understand it? As you say, the question was asked of Ramana Maharshi. I raise my arm. Is that also predetermined? And Ramana Maharshi said, yes. Just one word. How would you explain that? That even your raising your arm is predestined, predetermined. Eddie, it would be a reaction to something at the moment. Even if I say to you or somebody says, you are raising your arm because you want to, or whatever, I would be reacting to that, or I would not react to that. So it's a reaction. Ramesh, that is absolutely correct, Eddie. In other words, why did the man raise his arm? The raising of the arm was the reaction of the brain to what was heard, that everything is predetermined. Just seconds before, Ramana Maharshi had said, everything is predetermined. That was heard by the man, by the body-mind organism. And the brain reacted, I have no free will. I have no free will? I can raise my arm. So the raising of the arm was the reaction of the brain to what was heard. It was as much a reaction as scratching when there is an itch. Eddie, and even if you say, I have an itch, I'm not going to scratch, I'm not going to react, that's a reaction. Ramesh, correct. Absolutely. Ramesh, but make no mistake, I keep repeating it. All this is a concept. Make no mistake, it is a concept. Wendell, but people seek the truth through that. Ramesh, yes. Cindy, so it's not the truth that there is no free will? Ramesh, no, I told you. The only truth is I am. I exist. That is the only truth. Everything else is a concept. Rebirth is a concept. Your karma is a concept. There is no karma, which is yours. All that happens is God's will is a concept. But the concept that only God's will prevails, that concept gives rise to a simple life. No guilt, no pride, no hate. The concept, I have free will, leads to frustration and pride and hate. Craig, Ramesh, though it is a concept, I find that most people who believe in free will have not really thought about the whole matter. Ramesh, that's correct. That is why I say, if you believe you have free will, find out from your own experience in the past 6 months or 6 years to what extent your free will has prevailed. From your own experience, you'll find that really there is no free will. Wendell, Ramesh, if we accept the concept that there's no individual entity, that solves a lot of problems, doesn't it? Ramesh, it makes life simple, Wendell. How does it make life simple? Because if I am not the doer, then why should I feel guilty? Why should I feel pride? And why Should I hate people? So no guilt, no pride, no hate. Make life simple. I mean, other than that, what does one really need in life? Forget about spirituality. Forget about seeking. Forget about enlightenment. What is it that one needs in life? No guilt, no pride, no hate, no envy. Make life simple. It means peace. You're quite right. If you seek peace in this life, then the only thing to understand is that you are not the doer, that you're truly not responsible for anything that you do. But that doesn't mean that you have to be irresponsible, because the answer ultimately is do whatever you like according to any standards of morality and responsibility you have. The standards of morality and responsibility are part of the programming, and you cannot act other than your programming. Thank you, Beverly, for asking me to read for you. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. I know that was a lot. But I enjoyed your reading. Thank you very much. I just wanted to give or just reiterate some of the definitions before I get into some things. And most of the definitions I think he has for ego and body mind are kind of similar, but the way he breaks it down has just been really helpful for me. He defines the ego in another section of the book as divine hypnosis. For example, when we look into the mirror, we believe the reflection is reality. Under the section on divine hypnosis, he says, when you stand before the mirror, what is seen in the mirror is illusion. It's not there. It can only be there if you were there. So this illusory world as manifestation cannot be there in the absence of consciousness. The moving pictures cannot be there in the absence of the screen. So the screen is real. The moving pictures are not real. Consciousness is reality. Everything is manifestation. The human beings are part of the manifestation. The functioning of the manifestation is like a dream. He goes on to say, now a clever hypnotist can make 2,000 people believe that something which is not there is there as a solid entity. Can he not? So if a clever hypnotist can make 2,000 people believe there is something solid when there isn't, then is it difficult for the divine through hypnosis to make each individual body-mind organism think that the world is real and solid? Then quoting Your Head in the Tiger's Mouth, he states, we are constantly being misled by God through divine hypnosis so that life as we know it may go on. And again, he defines programming as certain natural characteristics that were stamped at the moment of conception: physical, mental, intuitive, and emotional. And this body-mind organism has been conditioned by the environment. You had no choice about your parents. You had no choice about the environment. And therefore, you had no choice about the conditioning that this body-mind receives. And he says, by programming, I mean genes and conditioning. He also defines programming as inherited tendencies. In some cases, the program is such that there is great resistance. And in other cases, the program is such that it is wide open and there is great receptivity. He repeatedly says throughout this book, of course, that these are all concepts and to let go and discover for yourself what is true. He states that conditioning is happening all the time and that new conditioning may alter the old conditioning. He quotes Ramana stating that that is the only purpose of a concept, to be used as a thorn to remove another thorn embedded in your foot, then throw both thorns away. So I read this book and it really had quite an impact on me. What it's caused me to do is I'm now kind of looking at my personhood and am opening myself up to having a love affair with what is. Not just the parts of me that bring me peace and joy, but the parts of me that bring me grief and sadness or anger. I'm becoming more non-discriminatory regarding what shows up. When I won't fall in line with my idea of who I should be, I'm more able to let this be. This too is what is. If I'm not in control of even how I show up, then am I in control of what seems to show up outside of me? The more I see this, the less involved with the body mind I become. It would seem that the body mind is something that must be conquered, but it's quite the opposite. How does one get upset with oneself and keep demanding, why won't you be other than what you are? We demand this of life and we demand this of our very nature. This body mind machinery that we come here with is not any of our business. The current that is running through this body mind knows what it is doing. When I inquire, I can introduce new conditioning. And as Ramesh says, conditioning is always happening. I think we always think of conditioning as, what happened to us when we were little, or, the type of family we grew up in and the type of beliefs that we accepted. But Ramesh states that the conditioning is happening all the time, every moment, and whatever we see and hear is part of the conditioning. And the conditioning can amend the earlier conditioning. For example, he states that you must fight the ego is prior conditioning. Now I'm telling you, don't fight the ego. It is useless. The ego will not commit suicide. It is only the power that created the ego that can destroy the ego. So accept the ego and let it continue. This is the conditioning that will alter the existing conditioning of being told to fight your ego. So as I sit in like satsangs, I realize that this is what's happening. And I'm often challenging old conditioning. And the old conditioning can be as recent as last month. I'm recognizing that the body mind is a distraction from the current that is moving through me, be it fear or unworthiness or anger. It is what has shown up. Rejection of my body mind is just a form of involvement that reinforces what is not happening. So when fear comes up, my personal tendency will be to resist in the unique way that my body mind resists. What I notice is that what is playing in the background, this undercurrent of fear, anger, hopelessness, or unworthiness, is what is driving the mind-body response that I'm resisting by believing that it should not be. The shouldn't is the separation. It is what creates the space. This thinking about is what creates the gap that creates two. Sometimes I fall prey to what I call a gap hangover. And this is when I realize that I've gotten involved in a belief that comes nowhere close to what I've seen or know to be true. Or when my actions demonstrate that I've completely forgotten what I've seen. There seems to be like a recovery process. It's almost like a hangover from this that brings me back to what is true. And I think it's almost being unable to accept that discrepancy or accept that distance that sometimes makes it hard to recover. It's so funny, last night, I feel like everything is dropping into my homily. Last night I was watching a show on Netflix and there was this therapist on the show that said something interesting, and she was giving advice to a loved one. And she said, holding two incompatible ideas in your head and being okay with both of them, that's life. I'm looking forward to times when I wake up cranky or sad for no reason, when I'm miserable or when this undercurrent is making itself known. I don't have to worry about what the result will be. I can just see it for what it is. Somehow, I thought it was up to me. I thought you have to take responsibility for this thing that is coming through you. Thoughts, feelings, emotions. And I realize now that that is impossible. I can no more control the current that is coming through me than I can control the current that is coming through someone else. As much conditioning as I introduce to myself to get closer to truth, I'm not responsible for the current that is running through the machine. Ramesh gives the analogy of the electricity that operates the toaster. I cannot be a better toaster. And unlike the toaster, we try to fight the current that is running through us, modify it, judge it, make it more palatable. We feel guilty, angry, or even proud about the toast we produced. When you look at it this way, it's pretty ridiculous. He says, this body-mind organism as part of the manifestation is an instrument through which the impersonal consciousness functions. If there is only this one mind, this one life flowing through this entire existence, what else could I be? I don't need to take responsibility for my enlightenment. I am this one happening. And when I separate into my life, my problems, my journey, I lose myself in separation. I lose my footing, and here comes the wave, and my feet can't touch the ground. And it comes to me that there was never any ground, and that the footing that I thought I had as a separate me never existed. The me that thought it was doing something is lost. Now, this can feel catastrophic, or it can feel like extreme relief. In this movie, I may be fulfilling my role as complainer, savior, sufferer, overcomer, but there is no doer. So the question often comes up, where does free will come into play? Destiny versus free will. The doer in me struggles with this. It asks, what is mine, M-I-N-E, to do? It wants to know. As Ramesh says, do what you want. And my intellect struggles with this, as Andy read. And then a common question that's often asked, well, what if I want to go out and kill someone? And the answer is, well, my body, mind, my conditioning, my level of morality, and my standards of responsibility is my programming. I couldn't become a serial killer if I wanted to. Now, is that free will? That is not how source is happening in this body mind. Source is happening through every body mind. There's only one. So my free will is within the will of God. My desire for awakening is within the will of God. Every choice that I make is within the will of God. The mistakes, the movement that comes from self-will, the inspired movement, the epiphanies. As I realize this, there is the temptation to say, well, what is the point? But the doer can never know the point, the purpose, the why, and it will eventually burn out trying to figure all of that out. As the silence becomes louder, the doer just becomes quieter and even subservient at some point. What this lets me know is that I can leave the me alone, stop bullying it, trying to get it to fall in line, trying to make it feel bad, trying to shut it down, trying to kill it. Even the me is none of my business. That part of the programming or conditioning that is still left will be there until it is not, and that is not up to me. I have no idea what is necessary for the unfolding of this great self. I don't have the manuscript. It can't be obtained. The rule book is not accessible. Leela, or the game that is being played, does not have a rule book. What is, and I am a part of that isness as I am, perfect in every way. You know how in some spiritual circles, people say you're perfect, you are as God made you, you know, and I remember I would hear that and it would just womp, womp, womp. Like it never had any, any meat for me. Like, yeah, I'm perfect. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, I can see what that means. Even the me that I have tried to get rid of is perfect. The prayer, make me an instrument of your peace. A beautiful song, I think Regina played her last homily. Well, what else could I be? I am the perfect instrument for what is needed in any moment. Peace is operating through this instrument at all times, looking like whatever it looks like. Adi Shanti said that love or grace can be beautiful and hold you, but it can also be fierce. When love or grace is fierce and takes us through trying times, we no longer see it as love. The so-called karmic patterns that I experience are instruments of love. I'm so busy screaming, please make it stop, that the love becomes unrecognizable. What I heard the self saying in my darkest moment was, I am coming for you by any means necessary, but leave all meaning to me. Grace can be fierce as it dissolves our greatest plans, intentions, and attachments. I was so involved that I became blind to the love that was presenting itself. I got involved in the happening, trying to affect it, trying to control it, as well as trying to control my own reaction to it. True freedom is freedom from involvement. And I'm still learning this lesson. Something interesting that Adyashanti said in one of his satsangs that struck me was that if he could describe awakening, it would be that this is it. We've all heard this on some level or another, but to accept that this moment is it, no matter what it looks like. If we knew the sacredness of this moment, if we could feel the sacredness of this moment, that is what awakening is like. That as I pick up a cup that I may be holding, just that action holds within it everything. And I thought, what if I approached life like this? Another definition of enlightenment that he gives is absolute cooperation with the inevitable. So as I looked at that more closely, it means cooperating with whatever shows up. This distorts itself as suppression occurs for some. I know it has for me. We want to cooperate, but we can't, so we suppress. But if rage shows up, surrender. If sadness shows up, surrender. If joy, yes, a lot of us have problems surrendering to joy. If joy shows up, surrender. Some of us have trained ourselves to cooperate with only that which is desirable or spiritually acceptable, trying not to fail some imaginary test. If I am angry with God, I can even surrender to that. There's no limitation to how the divine may express itself. There is no such thing as partial expression. What's here is here. Surrender to every pink elephant in the room. This is authenticity. Leaving the me alone is surrender, as Adyashanti put it in one of his satsangs. Ramesh gives examples of a sage's reaction, and I thought this was powerful. He says, what is the difference between anger arising in a sage and anger arising in an ordinary person? Anger arises because the brain reacts to what is heard or seen. The brain produces the anger, not the ego. Where does the ego come in? The ego reacts to the reaction of the brain. That is involvement. In the sage, the anger arises as a reaction of the brain, but the sage witnesses it taking its course. The anger may result in an action. The sage watches the anger arise and take its action. The sage doesn't say, it was I who was angry and I did this act. The subsequent reaction to the basic reaction is the ego, the involvement. The original reaction is a physical reaction of the brain. The subsequent reaction is the ego. In the case of an ordinary person, he would say, I was angry. I shouldn't be angry. My doctor has told me not to be angry. So therefore, I must do something not to get angry. I must find some way not to get angry. I must control myself. This goes round and round and round. In the case of the sage, anger arises and simply takes its course with no involvement. Here is a specific example in the case of Nisargadatta Maharaj. What happened was someone asked a question. Maharaj's ears heard the question. So hearing of the question happened. The brain reacted to that question and anger arose. You've been coming here for many years and you ask a stupid question like that? Anger arose. But what happened? Almost immediately thereafter, the same man made a statement that was very humorous, and Maharaj laughed the loudest. So one split second, anger rose, and in the next minute, laughter arose. In the case of an ordinary man, what would have happened? He would have said that he was not going to laugh. But there was no Maharaj to get angry. Anger came and went, and laughter took its place. About fear, it too arises. For example, there are two ordinary people. Fear arises in the case of the one, and fear does not arise in the case of the other. Arising of the fear has nothing to do with the ego, but the ego reacts to that fear. And as with anger, so with fear, the ordinary person says, I was afraid. I get afraid. I wish I could be like my friend who doesn't get afraid. So the involvement arises because of not being able to accept the programming. In the case of a sage, fear may also arise. If so, he accepts that the body-mind organism is so programmed that in having a particular kind of experience, fear arises. The fear may make him run away, but in running away, the sage will not say, I should not have run away. My friend did not run away. Why did I run away? I should not get afraid. That would be involvement of the ego, the ego's reaction to fear. So there is a basic reaction and also the reaction of the ego. In the case of the sage, a basic reaction happens because it is a programmed reaction of the brain, but there is no ego, and therefore there is no involvement of the ego. There is no reaction to the basic reaction by the ego. Don't forget this is a concept. It is what I say. You have to find out from your own experience if this concept is acceptable or not. That will depend on God's will and your destiny. It is remarkable how confirmation of what I'm saying is found in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says that likes and dislikes arise when the senses come into contact with the respective objects, and that you should not get involved in the arising of likes and dislikes. That is the problem. The involvement is the problem, not the arising of likes and dislikes. The arising of likes and dislikes is a natural thing. Getting involved with them is the problem. Repression, or letting go of how I feel I should be, has been the problem. Rejecting my wants and preferences has been part of my so-called spiritual path. I've not let it be. What is will win every time. No matter how much I have repressed and shoulded myself, it's the only meaning that I give. It's only the meaning that I give what is showing up that causes the disturbance. The self cannot reject anything. So why do we? And I would like to add to this that even should you get involved, that is what happened. Don't get involved with the fact that you got involved. Don't feel that you shouldn't have gotten involved. Goes round and round, as he says. These concepts were helpful for me in destroying this last idea that life is up to me and that I have to manage life. That life requires my intervention and involvement. Anything that I do or don't do is a part of what is already unfolding. This knowledge will not alter my programming, but will make me less likely to get involved with it, knowing that it is none of my business. Grace is always happening no matter what my life looks like, sometimes holding me in its gentle embrace, and sometimes upturning my entire world until only truth is left. So I wanted to share a contemplation that I had after reading this book briefly. Just a little paragraph here. The temptation to connect reason and intellect to karmic patterns or perceive actions as mistakes is useless. There is truly nothing to think about. What has happened is happening and is none of my business, no matter how urgent it may seem. And actions, whether executed through right or wrong mind, is none of my business. My temptation to get involved with my psychological mind regarding these phenomena is what keeps me in bondage. Yet neither the momentary shortcoming nor the inspired action requires my thinking mind. There's no need to get involved. I am needs no assistance from the thinking mind, which could never know it. In all my actions, I am an inseparable instrument of the one mind in which the universe moves. My perceived failures and victories could not be more perfectly orchestrated by and is this one mind. How arrogant of me to say that I should or shouldn't be. This realization allowed me to have such compassion for myself and others. And yet even this understanding is beyond my mind's reach. There is just a quiet freedom. And this concludes my homily. Thanks, everybody.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.